Today, we're going to be talking about Splunk AppDynamics and the most popular agent that we have, which is the APM Java Agent. I am Christopher Bonanno, a Senior Customer Success Specialist here at Cisco, and we are tasked with helping you guys be successful with products like AppDynamics for observability, offerings that Cisco provides, in the modern age where applications are critical to your business, and we're not just dealing with storefronts anymore. How are you going to monitor all of that? And if you're beginning your journey, probably a Java agent is going to be something that you're using a lot or starting to begin with. Let's start getting into it. So today, I'm hoping that you guys walk away with an understanding of an overview of AppDynamics and the Java agents that are a part of that. As well, I would love for you guys to know more about what APM Java agents do, as well how to instrument them manually on both Windows and Linux. And then we're going to go over some validation steps and go over some best practices and lessons learned. We in the customer success organization work with a lot of different customers, so we see a lot of things, and we're able to kind of refine that knowledge back to you and bring it back, or give you a list of best practices so that you can get off start off on the right foot and make sure that you're not going to be messing up when you're first starting out. So now, and then beyond that, we would love to hear more feedback from you guys. We are going to make this a series as well. We're going to come up with other series for you. Content that we create on our YouTube is largely feedback driven. So, anything that you guys provide us or are interested to know more of, or if you're just needing some help in general, please let us know. And you can do that by either commenting in the chat. If the chats are kind of flying by, it can get a little difficult to make sure we capture everybody. So this link will be provided to you in the chat as well as the video description when it's a recording later on. Go ahead and use this online form that we've created for you guys to provide any sort of feedback or request help, things like that. Let us know what's going on, or let us know what you're interested in learning next. Feedback is very important, and it makes sure that we're making content that is worth your time. So, quick overview of the agenda. We're going to do an overview of the agent, talk about the install steps and validation for both Windows and Linux, go over the best practices, and then we're going to call for questions and feedback at the end. Now, jumping into what is AppDynamics, right? So it is a monitoring solution that has various agents available, and we're going to be focusing on these blue ones here, the application performance or application performance monitoring. So it's going to be the everything out in the front that is dealing with customers, the digital side of things. That's usually end user monitoring or browser user monitoring, things like that. BRUM, MRUM, EUM, all of these great acronyms that you guys might not care about right now. Everything that is front facing to the customer, that is all under end user monitoring. And then when those links are clicked or a profile is updated or a document is pulled up along with the inventory, all of that stuff is going to the back end of the application. And that's where we are talking about today. So we want to, focus on even if there's a database call or a CDN call, things like that, all things from the backend application that's powering that front end. And the way our agents work is it sits in the app stack. The library is actually called with bytecode instrumentation, and it's not changing anything. It's not offending anything. It is simply just observing traffic going in and out, as well looking at the messages and the log statements and things like that, so that it can bring it back to the controller and give you insight of what's going on from the application stack on a nice, comfortable UI. And then you can refine it, make it data that is valuable to you and your company, things like that. And in a nutshell, this interpretation is exactly how it works. It's agents sitting there with the app stack in the same heap, sending information back to the controller. And that communication from the agent to the controller is one way. It's very important to know this, especially if you're going to be testing the connectivity between your application side to up to the controller. You want to make sure that whatever port it's listening on, if you're running SaaS, it's almost always 443. Like I said, it's a one-way communication, so you don't need to make any sort of bi-directional firewall rules, but it is important to make sure that you have connectivity, or we're not going to get very far. So now let's talk more about the application Java agent. So that was kind of general, app dynamics, general, APM, making sure that you have connectivity, how it all works together. Let's kind of zoom in a little bit more on the APM side. So now application performance monitoring involves, with looking at the app stack, like I showed you before, and then there's some key terminology that goes along with that. There's business applications, which are the transactions going, from tier to tier, or going out and calling information and coming back. All the transaction, all of the interactions, or the all of the calls that are being made from the application side is considered a business transaction. And what are those business transactions traveling through? Now, if you have a business application, you have the hierarchy at the top is the business application. Under that, you have a bunch of tiers within that application. Within each one of those tiers, you have a bunch of nodes, and then business transactions are traveling through all of those. So whether it's going from maybe you have some sort of services tier that's going over to an inventory tier, and it's in that inventory tier, it's going out to a back end call, like a database, to find out if the right product is there, and it comes back, reports it back to the that whole transactional communication between all of the components of your application. Those are all going to be considered business transactions traveling through the nodes tiers within a business application, and they could go out to backends. So kind of worded it differently. It gets a little confusing. So, let me know if you need a redo on that one. But largely, these are going to be important for you to know going forward. But we're not going to spend too much more time on this. Let's get back to specifically the APM Java Agent. Now, when we're dealing with deployment strategies, you almost always want to test it out first as a manual process. You want to, do those connectivity tests. You want to make sure that you have access, the right permissions to get to where this needs to be. You also, or, where the Java agent's going to live. You also want to, make sure that you have the right permissions for the application that's running. All these qualifications that we're going to talk more about in a little bit, that's your time to test all of these things, which arguments you're going to use, what modeling you're going to use, etc. All of it becomes very important in the beginning, setting it up manually. Then you can start getting more fancy, start getting into scripted options. You might have something downloading the agents and deploying it to multiple from one jump server. Or you might have some sort of automated option where you're using Ansible or Puppet and you're able to just run a job. Or you could possibly the applications largely have pipelines in place so that they can deploy versions of their applications or changes to their applications. Sometimes it's better to just piggyback off of there, and they might have a dedicated middleware engineer or DevOps person, or it just might be a part of the greater support team. However it's happening, possibly piggyback off of how they deploy the applications and just create a CI/CD pipeline that goes along that same track, and deploying the agent with all of the requirements. If you don't have any of these options, except if you only have manual and scripted and you can't get to that best practice of automated or running with the app, there is another option of the agent, and that is going to be a really nice tool that we have available for free, and it is out there on the controller. If you go look under the agent management, you can actually go under there and you can be deploying your agents that way. You can reconfigure them, you can upgrade them, you can terminate them. yeah, you have a lot of options of being able to control them from the controller, which is awesome. And, obviously saves you some work in terms of setting up all this extra automation if it's not required. Obviously, those are best practices, but if you don't have another option, we've got your back here with Smart. And now, if we're looking at the steps for the manual install, we want to start breaking it down by, what's important to start thinking about as you're doing that. So, at high level, you're going to want to think about, first of all, if it's just a test, if it's a point of proof of concept, something like that, then you're gonna want to make sure that you're, just doing it manually, setting it up, and if you want to put like my test app one, my test tier two, whatever, something vague, you go ahead for it, or go ahead and do it. But if you want to start digging in where, you're going to be, um, you know, putting it within existing, like say that you have a newly onboarding application and you already have AppDynamics and you want to make it a part of that. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to what application name is already there, and then what tier it would go under if applicable, or creating its own tier. And you want to do this by, the best tier to tier communication that you can, and then also, without making it too crazy, where, if you have 15 apps combined into one, you're going to have too many things to try to uh, you know configure to work together in AppD, where reporting might not, need to be to that level. It might need to be a little bit more granular based on the specific travels or specific part of a greater application kind of thing. It's very um, subjective to what you need. And, if you need help deciding on that stuff, reach out to your customer success engineer or people on your account, an architect, and talk through those things upfront and early, so that you don't have to go back and do a redeployment. Every once in a while you'll have to, but try to avoid it as much as you could. Step two, download the agent. Pretty simple, right? You're just downloading the binaries. It's usually a zip file, and you're going to either pop it on, through RDP, or, Scoop or something, depending on which kind of operating system you're using. And then you're going to want to make sure when you're actually unzipping it and you're deploying it, you want to make sure that the user permissions are right. You want to make sure that the big.xml, or whichever way you're using to, um, for the controller info.xml, you're wanting to make sure that the right config files are updated. As well, the startup arguments are updated on the application itself. And then when it comes to validation, it's really a two-step process. Make sure there's logs being written, and then go look in the controller and see if there's something there. I guess an extra one, I guess the first option you'd want to do too, before these ones even, is see if, when you're starting the application, see if it mentions the agent, or if any issues with the agent, because you do add it to the startup statements, or the startup script. So, and I'll show you more of this, and you'll get a good example from the demos. And then beyond that, if you're, really looking for specific data and really trying to make sure that you're getting the right KPIs, the key points of interest, you're zeroing in on that bullseye of insight that you've been striving for as a company or a team. Make sure that you align your deployment strategy and everything. But then once all that's done, don't just set it and forget it and walk away and expect, all your problems to be solved by AppDynamics. Go look in AppDynamics, make sure it's got information that you want or that's relevant. Get rid of things that aren't, and, start showing things that are. Sometimes it's really good out of the box, and sometimes it's not the insight you need. So be ready to spend a little bit of time doing tuning, as with anything else, right? The download, you're going to go to the accounts.appdynamics.com/downloads. And at the site, you have the option of selecting what type of agent, obviously the version, which operating system it's for. You can even put compatibility with the controller if you need it. If you have a really old version of on-prem, something like that, that might be more pertinent. And then depending on if you're downloading it on Windows or Linux, you can either use the button or the curl command. and transfer it over there however you need. If it's from a jump server or a repo, every company is a little different. I will say real quick there that there is a configuration wizard in the controller, but I honestly prefer going this route because you get more information about the version and the type of agent that you're trying to get. Where the other one, it might give you the generation back in the wizard. So I always recommend doing it this way and getting familiar with it. So now let's go ahead and jump into the demo. We're going to kind of pretend that I already have the agents downloaded. I've already, scooped them or, RDP'd, copied and pasted them to my Windows and my Linux servers. And we're going to just start, going right into, actual instrumentation. You guys know how to scoop. You guys know how to FTP. You guys know how to, copy and paste. So I don't see the point of spending time there. So we're going to start on Windows. And as you can see, our location for our AppDynamics agents are under the C drive, under AppD. Java Agent is where I'm wanting to go. And then now if you are running multiple versions of the agent, then it becomes very important to know that, you want to keep these versioning folders that pop up. With every install, a new version will pop up in here. And you might have 4 different applications and 2 of them are using an old version of the agent and another application's using the new version of the agent. Maybe they're on different restart cycles, but they're sharing the same server, stuff like that. It tends to happen a little bit more on Linux, to be honest, or what I've seen, than on Windows servers, since largely it's usually a lot of .NET and some Java things that are running over here. But what we really want to focus on is making sure that you update the right configuration file to make sure that you update the correct argument of where these libraries reside. So now I'm going to use this one. I'm going to stick with the example I gave of the possibility that there might be more than one version running on the same server. And, I want this application that I'm instrumenting to only be looking at this version. So the configuration file that I'm going to update is the one within there. Now, I don't want to obviously open this up and show you, but I made a copy of it so I can show you, an example of what things we're going to need to be updating in here. Hopefully you guys can see it and it's not too tiny for you. I'm going to scroll back up to the top and we're going to start off with making sure that you have the controller host. Sorry, my load script pops up in front every once in a while, so try to ignore that. Controller host, and then you have controller port. If you're talking to a SaaS controller, this is just the URL. Or the IP if it's on-prem. Hopefully you set up a DNS. It's a lot cleaner. And if you're trying to be official with people within your organization, you want to try to look more official. You want to try to have a URL that they're going to, and not just IP address and random ports. But at the same time, if it's a monitoring tool and everyone's accustomed to that sort of thing, go for it. You want the port, whatever port you're picking. You do have, if it's SaaS, it's almost always 443. So you want to stick with that. It is pretty quick, but very annoying. And now the controller, is usually running SSL. So you really usually want to put this to true. If it's not, put it as false. And then come down here to application. So what I was telling you before, application name, tier name, node name, depending on where you want it to reside in the controller, this is the basically your controls of how you organize that application to be represented in the controller. So now if this is the business application, these are the tiers, these are the nodes and their logical groupings, and the only thing that can't be the same across multiple of these instrumentations is a node name. Typically you want to have a different node name for each node so that they're not stumbling over each other and having registration issues on the controller. And then when you come down here further, again, all of these things are very useful if you're going to be using them, but for sake of manually just getting it going, starting out your journey, starting to see things come into the controller so you can see if you like the way it's being represented. Just scroll past all of that, come down to account name. Account name is usually, especially if you're on a SaaS controller, the account name is usually the beginning portion or the beginning segment of your URL. So if it's appdexample at or I'm sorry, appdexample.saas.appdynamics.com, that appd example is going to be the account name. A lot of times on prem, it's going to be considered customer one, but that might be different depending on which tenant you are within your greater organization. And then you have the account access key, which is like your key to the controller saying which application you're assigned to, or if it's the default one. If you have an AppDynamics admin, that's running things, work with them. They'll give you all of this. They'll tell you what to update. But for exposure, for you to get going, very good to start coming in and understanding what you need to update to get things to report correctly. Before I change over and start starting things up and validating, etc., I wanted to quickly bring up a kind of a pro tip. This is a really good way of instrumenting your applications. It is also the easiest way. But if you are wanting to get more advanced, or if you have a lot of applications, a lot of nodes to scale, you're going to also want to consider possibly adding these details into your arguments, your startup arguments, and that will supersede what you have in here. So you can almost make this your default settings, and then anything that reports to the controller under those default settings, if they don't match say that 50% of the applications are using these defaults, and then the other 50 need slight tweaks or slight adjustments. You can add these arguments to those startup scripts, and this will supersede what is in here. You also have the option of putting in environment variables, and this applies on both Linux and Windows. So let's get out of there before my load script runs again. And let's start checking things out in terms of the actual startup script that we're going to be updating. So now we were just in that configuration file, and now I'm going to go over to where the actual application lives. I'm going to go under game servers, and I have two different startup scripts. The one that I created with the Java agent, let's go ahead and check that out. We'll make it a different color, something a little easier to see. And now we're saying that I want it to pull this library when it's starting this server.jar. So when this Java application starts to run, I want it to load these in there. And that's where it's going to be. That's going to be sharing space within the same heap. And it's just observing data, and it sends it over to the controller so that you know what's going on in the greater application. It is called bytecode instrumentation, very powerful, and it allows you to see things at the code level and the messages and the logging and everything that is there. It allows you to get some sort of insight in the controller in a UI. So awesome. And that's all it took. I just have to put the agent here, and I spoke a lot trying to introduce you to it, but really I updated 6 things in a config file. I added the location of the jar file in the startup script, and now watch. It's very simple. I'm gonna go and run that script now. Okay, I could spell it. There we go. All right, and if you notice, it's talking a lot about the Java agent. It's making sure that it's successfully running. By this point, it would have already started giving me errors. Minimize that. And since we're in Windows, I'm going to just go look under the version folder, and then we're going to go under logs, and I should see the current time and date writing to these logs. So that's validation number 1 was looking at the startup arguments and seeing the messages come up from it when I ran the script. The second one, make sure that logging is coming in. If that's good, we should be able to jump over to the controller. So this is the overview base location when you first go into the controller. The application that we're using, for example, today is going to be this AD Games Inc. And now we're going to go over under tiers and nodes. And now this, it's within the last 5 minutes. It's just barely started. So don't worry about this. Look, as long as this is green, you should be good. And it should be coming under this tier, under this host name, or, it's the standard that I chose to go with was, signifying which application it was, what kind of technology it is, what kind of server it's running on, and then the host name. There's allotment of 500 characters in a node name, so that you can make yourself, little breadcrumbs to go and understand, hey, what's running and where, all just from the node name. I wouldn't recommend using 500 ever. But it is nice to know that you have a lot of options of, essentially creating tagging within the naming of the node and tier names. Tier name does not have 500. I believe it's 125 or something like that. But, basically try to make it something relevant, but at the same time, don't over complicate and split out your tiers too crazy. If they're similar, like for example, I'm going to go over the same server.jar on Linux. I want them both under this tier. I want them both under the application AD games. But I might want them, obviously, I want them to be named differently because they're running on 2 different servers. And I'll show you, using the same naming standard, we'll go check that out on the Linux side. So we're in a very, basic location where a lot of people install things. So we're just going to look at it here, and we're going to go under AppDynamics, and then should look the same as what we were clicking around in on the here, let's make this a little bit bigger. When we were clicking around on the Windows server, it's all the same. It's all the same stuff. I named it slightly different, but it's all the same. So I'm going to go under Java Agent. If I do an ls there, you can see that version directory is there, and that's where I want to go into. So I'm going to go in there. And then, just like before, I'm going to want to go into the configuration. And now this controller info.xml is the one that we're going to be really making sure that, it has all the correct information. For security purposes, I'm not going to open mine. I'm actually just going to do this one, which is an example, just like before, but at least you get to see it in in Linux. So all the same stuff. Like I said, it's the same exact thing that you just saw on the Windows side. You're going to want to get that host name, the port, if it's going to be running SSL, start thinking of the application name, the logical groupings within the controller, and, start giving it a good name so that you can come up with a good naming standard, etc. So same stuff in here. We could obviously, if you need all of these points, to be filled out, then, and you have a very complex environment and you need proxies and you need, extra, encrypted credentials, etc., then by all means use these. We'll provide documentation in the description, or as well, we have some experts here on the line. If you have questions later, we can talk about those, but for sake of time right now, let's go ahead and jump out of here, and let's go ahead and start getting the tier and node to start reporting into the controller, just like we did before. So now you saw where in Java, we're going to have to start updating the controller info.xml. I'm also going to want to show you the startup script for start with Java. Oops, my bad. All right, so very similarly, right? I just have no hup here, so it doesn't bother me and I don't have to keep it running. But this is it, right? I just had to add the same Java agent jar to the arguments, and that way the libraries get picked up when the game server is running. And now I'm going to go ahead and start that. type. All right, so now if I do a tail of the no hup out, you'll be able to start seeing mentions of the agent. I'm not going to bother doing that right now, but I will do the other two options that I gave for validation, which is going into the AppDynamics Java Agent, version, logs, LSLTA. All right, so it's getting current logs written into the correct name of the node. Perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. So validation's good here. Let's go actually into the controller and start checking here. We might need to hit this refresh wheel here at the top. Boom. Now we have the one running on Windows, and we have MC02 running on the Linux server. We can also represent it a little bit differently here, where you can see it as a drop down, or you can get the full list. Obviously this is going to increase just like this one did. And then, as traffic starts hitting both of these, you'll see it on the application dashboard flow map. Right now, we don't have traffic going to them, but you can see they are running, they're reporting. As traffic starts going to them, that will be captured, and we just validated that. So let's go ahead and jump back over to the deck and start closing things up. Lost some time at the beginning. I'm sorry, I had to rush a little bit, so hopefully I'm not leaving anybody behind. Now let's start reviewing some requirements and best practices with these. So everything's simple when you know, but before you get there, you got to start looking at the complexity of things so you can make it something simple. Now the requirements, I talked about it already with the permissions. You have to have write permissions for the and read permissions for the app owner into where the app agent lives. Licensing is 1-to-1. When you purchase them, it's a little bit different, but I'll let your salesperson mention that to you. That's not really my role. But when you have one application instrumented, it will take one license away from that pool. And then if it's, for disk space, you want to make sure that you have 500 megabytes to 2 gigs. And this all depends on, are you going to be good about cleaning out the old versions? Are you going to have multiple versions running simultaneously? Or are you going to have a whole bunch of servers sharing, a whole bunch of applications sharing the same binaries from a NAS on a network, a network access storage? Are they going to just be, 20 servers sharing the same agent? You could do that, by the way, and make sure that you have linked storage to, or a linked path to each one of those, so that each one of those servers can see that mounted drive. But obviously, you're going to need more space, so be smart about that. Check documentation, talk with our support, talk with people on your account from Cisco. If you need help, that kind of stuff is definitely something that we can help with. Connectivity, that's usually going to fall under the firewall stuff. So, obviously you're going to want to make sure that you're testing before you do any sort of loading the agents. Why bother going through all of this trouble if you can't even get the agent to talk to the controller? So make sure you're doing your testing, and then also make sure that you're using the application agent in a supported environment, and an application that is actually something that's supported also. Agent and controllers also have compatibility that you have to align with. These are all things that if you're stuck, ask us. Either reach out on that forum, reach out to support, reach out to people on your account, ask questions. Nothing's more of a bummer than doing all this work and not working. It's very and the more you do without the testing and knowing in the beginning, the further away you are from knowing what went wrong. So make it methodical, make it a standard, and try to keep it simple, as much as you could. It does eventually become very simple, but in your first couple takes, all going to be a manual process that you're going to refine. Make sure that you are using the configurations. you have the option. I recommend filling out the controller info.xml under that agent home and the appropriate versioning. And if nothing else, put it as a default, like I said. And then if you want to get fancy and do environment variables or add the information in through the startup arguments, by all means, do that. But I wouldn't normally leave this blank if you have the choice. And now, beyond that, going into more best practices, before you start downloading agents, make sure that you're looking at release notes and, the compatibility. It's kind of a reminder of the last slide, right? Same big things. But like I said, it's very frustrating to set things up and it not work. And also, this is especially really important if you're upgrading, which is a whole other thing, but, largely has the same kind of impact. So make sure, once you start going, it's going to be like whatever other tool you had in its place before this, or other tools that you might maintain in addition to this. Or if this is your first monitoring or observability product in your environment, it's going to go along the same sort of terms that you're going to with anything else in technology, whatever framework, whatever code base you're working out of. You want to keep things up to date so that you don't have vulnerabilities. Our agents are supported by our actual Cisco support up to 2 years. So if you have an agent beyond 2 years, support might not engage as well, because we recommend make sure you keep things up to date. Save things like the agent version that everyone's on. Make sure that you're keeping backups. Make sure that you're maintaining those artifacts over time, because you might have an existing application that needs to be scaled up, and say that you don't want to necessarily reinvent the wheel every time you add more either tiers, nodes to or a whole new application. I'm speaking in terms of AppDynamics, but if you're bringing on more assets to monitor, make sure that you're maintaining the old artifacts and updating them so that you can give it to that shared services group or that middleware or that DevOps, and it doesn't have to be reinvented every time. Work smarter, not harder type of a thing. So we went over a lot of information. APM Java Agents, we didn't even touch on containerized versions yet, and that'll probably be in the series for sure. And now, but in terms of just looking at the Java agents and beginning your journey with AppDynamics, here's some key takeaways so you can be masterful like this guy with a million screens and probably always on a call. Speaking from my old prod support days here. Now, I would love for you to walk away from this knowing the ins and outs of your account portal, where you actually download the agents. If you don't have access to that, reach out to your admins if you're going to be an implementer and get access to it. Your admins can give you access to that portal, and then they can also help you with your version compatibility probably. If you are unsure about that, you can always submit a request to us or to support, or someone on your account team if you're a customer of Cisco. You have a lot of options there. So make sure that you're familiar with compatibilities. Make sure that you like the standard and you're able to follow the standard for your application tier and node naming. So maybe you want all caps, maybe you want it hammered, maybe you want everything separated by underscores, maybe you want everything whatever the case may be. Make it something meaningful to your company. Try to keep a standard. And you will see that a lot of people prefer a naming structure or a hierarchy or nomenclature. You want to make sure that the naming is correct and consistent, and come up with the modeling of those applications so you get the most transactions going from tier to tier without it being overwhelming. If you look at your application in AppDynamics and it's just way overwhelming, you might want to consider remodeling it, or maybe splitting it up via the the tuning I was mentioning earlier. But largely, you want to make sure that you do a lot of that in the beginning, and then also figure out what you're going to do as far as your deployment strategy. And like I said, if you're without a good deployment strategy, definitely check into the Smart Agent. And then also make sure that when you create a mounted directory or place to put AppDynamics, it's best practice not to have it in the same as your application folder, because your application folder is usually scaled just perfectly to deal with the application and all of the binaries that are in there, or sources. And then also there's probably a logging directory, etc. If our logging is competing with their logging for space in on the disk drive, that's a bad scenario. So give it its own location, like I did with Opt AppDynamics. It wasn't in the same Opt application. And by all means, I understand that you probably would realize that I wasn't necessarily showing you that I had a mounted drive for Opt AppDynamics, but just for sake of example, just don't have them in the same folder. At least if they're on the same volume and a different location, that's still better than trying to jam pack everything in the same folder. Sometimes a redeployment happens of the application, it takes out the agent, stuff like that. Just avoid situations like that are silly. Also, make sure that you're testing things in a lower environment and have load testing against it. Because we are bytecode instrumented, AppDynamics sometimes gets called out as a problem, but it's not. It's just it's in the stack trace because it's sitting there just watching everything going by and telling you what's going on in the controller. But it's not usually the cause. But you will, oftentimes, um, you know, want to make sure that you have tested things in non-prod environment so that you can say, hey, we did our testing, we did our due diligence. And if you don't have that option in a dev environment or a lower environment, maybe release it to 1 or 2 nodes. Don't do the whole group, and then add more later or little by little, just to make sure the application doesn't throw a fit with the monitoring instrumented, which it hardly ever does. This is our most popular agent. It's obviously very stable. Tons of people use it. Enough for me to come up with all these good takeaways, best practices, and everything. But it is worth mentioning because testing in a lower environment should be best practice for all IT related things. Standardize and automate your deployment strategies, like I mentioned before, and then also even in the controller, make sure that you have permissions correct to what people should actually see. Sometimes it'll grab things within the business transactions, that might be like a user ID or something like that. Make sure that the people looking in the controller have the right level of permission, or that you vetted them to make sure that they're not seeing something critical or sensitive in the application that they shouldn't. So these are kind of extra gotchas and lessons learned from seeing the various customers that we have as well. I was a customer, I've been in your shoes. These are all things that I've learned as well. So try to avoid those hard lessons yourself and be successful, like we're trying to get you to be. All right, so this is the time for Q&A. So if there's any questions that we want to go over, we have only 5 minutes. I'm sorry we lost some time in the beginning. If we don't get to finish answering a question, or if we don't get to it from the chat, definitely pull up that form that we sent a link out to earlier. We're here to help. We want feedback in terms of, was this helpful? Could it be better? Or what next would you like to see in the series of APM agent deployment webinars? What kind of or what other content would you like to see from us, and we'll make that for you. Now you have other options you can be a part of in Cisco community, where you can read articles. There's also Splunk community. Since the acquisition where Cisco purchased Splunk, AppDynamics is now a part of the greater Splunk suite, monitoring suite. So that's why you may have noticed, if you've been running AppDynamics for a while, the new coloring and new banners and the little hamburger menu and things like that. It has a lot more similarities and continuity between Splunk and AppDynamics, which, things like the log observability connect, you're largely able to click on links in one and go to the other back and forth. Very cool. And then for other CSS created content like this, you also, on the same YouTube channel, feel free to get on there and, see what other options there's. Short videos, long videos, medium videos, whatever you have time for. If there's something you want to learn, please check those out. And then also, like I said, give us feedback. If there's something that you want to see that's not already on there, we would really value that. And then if you're looking to get more into the certification, and you want labs to go through with an instructor, or if you want self-paced courses and labs to go through, definitely check out Cisco U. They have a lot of good resources at u.cisco.com. And they're going to be, like I said, really readying you for those certifications. We do enablement, they do the education type of a thing. Thank you all, and let's go ahead and have Hatham, if you would please read off any questions, or were there any that were missed? My view is kind of limited, but I don't see that we missed any chat questions. So I guess we can go ahead and start wrapping up. I guess thank you very much, everyone that joined, and we hope to see you next time.